Compared to the film, the true story of Elephant Man is even more startling. After he finally slept down, his neck snapped from the weight of his hefty head. Despite his intense desire for the part, Dustin Hoffman was ultimately turned down. Doctors misdiagnosed John Hurt's illness after thinking he had it for a century, and the makeup was so unsettling that even the film crew avoided looking at him. We are revealing all the frightening facts that Hollywood hid from you, from the staged kidnapping scenario to the clandestine DNA testing on his bones. A babysitter was the most unlikely conduit through which the Elephant Man's tale unfolded. The babysitter casually brought up the fact that her boyfriend had written a screenplay one night in 1978, as producer Jonathan Sanger was leaving for the night. He had heard that statement 100 times, just like everyone else in Hollywood. Probably out of politeness, he took the screenplay and stuffed it into a drawer, even though he wasn't interested. He didn't see it again for a year until he was cleaning his desk. Curiosity led him to read it. It was revealed that the long-lost screenplay was actually a remarkable biography of John Merrick, better known as the Elephant Man. An idea for a film started to form in Sanger's mind at that same moment. The script, based on the book The Elephant Man, A Study in Human Dignity, required the proper people to back it, so he wasted no time in securing the rights. Mel Brooks, indeed the king of comedy, was one of the most surprising backers. But Brooks was afraid that people would assume there would be jokes if they saw his name in the credits, so he avoided them at all costs. He was so committed to the story that he personally funded the film, and he wanted audiences to take it seriously. In particular, he stood up for the film's authenticity when studio executives wanted to remove the surreal opening and ending sequences. In a reprimand, Brooks said that they were forgetting that this was David Lynch's idea and not a collaborative effort. The choice was made by Stuart Kornfeld, who was Brooks's assistant and had noticed something unusual and exceptional in David Lynch, a new director. After viewing Eraserhead, Kornfeld was astounded. Despite Lynch's relative obscurity at the time, he vigorously advocated for her to helm The Elephant Man. Lynch and Sanger hit it off the moment they met. They had same tastes, styles, and a desire to present the narrative in a manner that would terrify audiences. Lynch was the only one capable of breathing life into such an otherworldly and gorgeous universe, proving Kornfeld's gut feeling correct. Lynch, however, was deeply involved in his own ideal project, Ronnie Rocket, and was thus unavailable at the moment. No studio wanted to handle it because it was odd and crazy. His disappointment at the project's inability to take off led him to an unexpected place: a readiness to adopt the narrative of another person. Lynch noticed parallels to his own work in The Elephant Man, which dealt with distorted landscapes, bodily deformities, solitude, and the confluence of the fantastical and the real. He decided to step in. Not everyone was immediately convinced. The starring role in The Elephant Man was Dustin Hoffman's immediate goal following his Academy Award-winning performance in Kramer vs. Kramer. Despite his best efforts, producer Jonathan Sanger turned him down for the part. Hoffman wasn't the ideal choice, in his opinion, not because of his abilities, but due to his star power. Sanger was concerned that viewers would spend the whole film searching for Dustin Hoffman's face under the prosthetics. He thought John Merrick's narrative would benefit from an unfamiliar actor who could fully immerse himself in the part. At that point, a completely new actor's career began to take off. While this was going on, John Hurt found himself smack dab in the center of one of the most disorganized sets ever seen on a Hollywood film production. The difficult film Heaven's Gate, which he was filming, was literally coming apart as they went. Cameras would start rolling, then pause, sometimes for days. The pauses seemed to go on forever. The invitation to play Merrick came to Hurt during one of those extended intervals. He managed to escape the devastation of Heaven's Gate, film all of the sequences for The Elephant Man, and then return to the set of Heaven's Gate, all thanks to his cunning and good fortune. It was a lucky break that Hurt would never forget. It landed him the part that would propel him to stardom. Hurt, though, was almost passed over for the part entirely. The actor from David Lynch's debut feature, Eraserhead, Jack Nance, was originally the one he sought. Because of their strong creative relationship, Lynch had faith in Nance and thought that her expressionless face could convey profound feelings. After Lynch seen Hurt's portrayal as a nude public servant in that film, everything changed. It rendered him speechless. How he could transform Hurt into a fictional character, transforming his loneliness and suffering into something lovely, was something he saw. Lynch reversed his decision after that one performance. At first, not even Anthony Hopkins was convinced. He had never seen Lynch before, and his only experience was with Eraserhead, which didn't exactly scream safe bet. However, after reading the screenplay and seeing the emotional weight of Travis's relationship with Merrick, he felt a connection. He was subsequently cast as the titular doctor, but he still wasn't certain until he saw Lynch face to face. For hours, they conversed. Lynch gave an impassioned account of the tale and his intentions. Hopkins had fully committed by the conclusion of the meeting. The casting of the rest of the actors was also surprising. Major players such as John Gielgud and Wendy Hiller consented to appear in the film despite Lynch's relative obscurity, lack of fame, and absence from the British theatrical scene. However, they were captivated by the tale and storyline in some way. Lynch was looking for performers with depth, and he had faith in these veterans to deliver. Not only did they believe the content, but they also put their faith in him. Nobody anticipated The Elephant Man's success upon its 1980 release. The filmmaker had a history of making surreal artistic pictures. The film was noir in style, and it centered on a man with a terrible deformity living in Victorian London. But it worked in some way. Making almost $26 million in North America, the film was Lynch's highest-grossing feature to date, despite having a production budget of under $5 million. Its unique appearance drew many admirers. This film drew audiences into a chilly industrial world through the use of shadows and grayscale, while the rest of Hollywood chased after colorful blockbusters. I could feel it in my bones. Almost immediately, Lynch transitioned from being a cult film director to a popular director. Even the film's producer, Mel Brooks, omitted his name from the credits so as not to give the impression that it was a comedy. That was astute. The film was successful because its plot twist was unexpected. Suddenly, a Star Wars film was being offered to Lynch. Money wasn't the only measure of success. The film was a smashing success at the British Academy Film Awards, BAFTAs, in several categories, including Best Film, Best Actor, John Hurt, and Best Production Design for the film's convincingly realistic settings. It was all very Victorian-era London, complete with gloomy hospitals and dirty streets. That was important to the British audience since the real-life Joseph Merrick had lived and died in their country. Numerous nominations for the picture in categories like as screenplay, editing, and direction demonstrated that it was not just respected, but admired by the industry. In the United States, however, an unusual event occurred. The Elephant Man was nominated for 8 Academy Awards that year, including Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Screenplay, and more, but it failed to secure a single victory. Raging Bull tied for the most nominations that year with 8. Not even for the seemingly assured winner, makeup. Agitation ran rampant. The makeup artists who petitioned the Academy for an honorary award never received one. A new category, Best Makeup, was established to the Oscars the following year as a result of the outcry, which was even more significant than the snub of The Elephant Man. Not only did it have an emotional impact, but it also transformed the Academy. Afterwards, a lovely event occurred 40 years later. In 2020, a new 4K version of the film was published right before the planet was due to shut down from COVID-19. Full restoration from the original film reels was involved, so it wasn't just a simple re-release. Under Lynch's careful supervision, every frame was cleaned and fixed until it looked precisely like he had always wanted it to. Details that had been lost for decades were brought back to life in the new version. Textures, shadows, and light. People watched it online, bought it, and waited in line for the collector's version with art cards and a pop-up chapel, even though cinemas were closing all around the globe. Just like its initial release, the film's comeback was even more shocking than before. I don't know how movies do with time, but The Elephant Man really got better with each viewing. Playing Joseph Merrick in The Elephant Man was more than simply a part for John Hurt. It was an undertaking that would put his mental and physical faculties to the test in ways that very few performers ever face. He had a daily deadline of 5 a.m. to be on set, and after that, every day was a struggle against his prostheses and weariness. Applying only the cosmetics might take up to 9 hours. John had to wear that thick makeup late into the night, often until 1 a.m., and filming wouldn't begin until the afternoon because of this. 2 additional hours of sitting through it all had to pass after the cameras stopped rolling. He put in over 19 hours without a break on days when filming was underway. Because it was so painful, he could only shoot once every 2 days. "I think they finally made me hate acting," John quipped at one point. Cosmetic effects artist Christopher Tucker also spared no effort. He visited the Royal London Hospital and had access to a genuine plaster replica of Merrick's corpse, complete with strands of Merrick's actual hair. That is how Tucker created prosthesis that looked virtually lifelike. He made 15 separate parts that, when worn consecutively, had to be precisely aligned. The finished product had every feature: the protruding bones, the twisted mouth, the hanging skin, and the disproportionately large forehead. Some were so taken aback by how lifelike it seemed that they mistakenly believed the production images to be color portraits of the genuine Elephant Man. Everyone around John couldn't help but notice the gradual application of makeup as the days went by. The team only gazed at first, but eventually they averted their gaze. For some, it was like stepping into the 1800s, when the public first laid eyes on the authentic Merrick and couldn't quite put their finger on him. After viewing the initial test, even filmmaker David Lynch experienced nightmares. The sight of John in full costume caused onlookers to either gasp or become quiet. And even after months of working with him, the crew still avoided making eye contact with him. Because of that creepy vibe, the entire show felt very realistic to Merrick's existence. The physical agony, however, was a separate beast from the emotional response. John had to drink his food via a straw since his prostheses were too tight for him to chew solid food. The headgear was about 20 pounds on its own, and by midday, every day, it was giving him such a terrible headache that he could not move his head. He broke out in rashes from the adhesive, had trouble seeing out of one eye, and perspired profusely due to the layers trapping heat. After filming wrapped, he had dropped 12 pounds. Sometime later, he compared it as being buried alive. Despite this, he managed to pull off a performance that would get him nominated for an Oscar. Another enormous obstacle was getting the voice to sound properly. Working with specialists who had examined Merrick's cranium, John didn't only speculate about what Merrick's voice could have sounded like. Merrick was discovered to have a partially deaf and severely malformed mouth, making it nearly impossible for him to move his tongue. In order to mimic it, John donned a specialized dental plate, inclined his head to one side, and talked through narrow passageways with his mouth partially closed. He dedicated hours of daily practice, despite the discomfort it caused his throat, because he claimed that discovering Merrick's voice was more challenging than donning the makeup. But that was important to him. He wanted Merrick to seem sensitive and perceptive. Finally, doctors and other medical professionals lauded the performance, saying it sounded much like the genuine Merrick. Although the events shown in the film are based on true events, the tale nonetheless manages to evoke strong emotions. Just looking at the name is a major red flag. The real-life Joseph Merrick, who was the inspiration for the story, went by the name John Merrick. This wasn't an afterthought. It was taken from a doctor's book who had treated him in the past. The name he chose was incorrect, and it was perpetuated in media until it became actual reality. The proper name was disregarded despite evidence to the contrary, since the incorrect one had already taken root. One such creation is the film's villain, Mr. Bites, the nasty showman. The real-life Merrick exhibitor was a guy called Tom Norman. Norman, who plays a belligerent drunk on film, was actually a decent businessman. Their time together was brief, just a few weeks before the cops broke down the show. But he didn't mistreat Merrick or keep him locked away. After that, Norman ran additional programs and had a big family of his own. However, in order to fit the plot, the film inflated his backstory to make him seem much darker than he actually was. Also, there's the night porter, an employee at the hospital who secretly lets visitors see Merrick while he's supposed to be sleeping. No one in the hospital ever treated Merrick that way, thus this person never existed. He was an afterthought, but the producers included him to show that Merrick isn't always protected from terrible people. He fabricated the scenario when he makes Merrick drink and puts him on display again for dramatic effect. It never occurred. Additionally, the film embellishes Merrick's relationship with Madge Kendall. She pays him many visits, says nice things to him, and, in an odd moment supposed to demonstrate his innocence, she even shows him her body in the film. Nothing like that transpired. Although she did her part to collect funds for his medical expenses, there is very little evidence of their actual encounter. Nonetheless, the film depicts this lovely connection between them, giving the impression that Merrick made a friend in the upper class. Though heartwarming, it is untrue. The most horrific aspect is the kidnapping sequence, in which Bites abducts Merrick, puts him in a cage, and makes him live among monkeys. Absolutely none of it is real. No good-hearted circus performers ever came to Merrick's rescue or even took him from the hospital. He had gone a long way from being handled like an animal, and the entire episode was staged for dramatic effect, to shock the audience. Joseph Merrick preferred to be understood rather than pity-treated. During his exhibition days in the 1880s, he sold a little inexpensively produced brochure as his best effort to do that. It was unassuming, yet it conveyed his honesty. His writings detail the onset of the malformations, which he described as beginning at the tender age of 3 with little pimples on one side of his body. They worsened over time. After his mother passed away when he was 12 years old, he recounted how his stepmother treated him badly and how he ended up living on the streets. He claimed he would prefer to go hungry outside than return home because of the cruel taunting he endured. His own words, much more truthful than the theatrical tales later made up in plays and movies, make the reading unpleasant, but they were his. Everyone who read the brochure remembered one section. Joseph frequently included the following little poem in his letters. "I have an unusual shape, but if you blame me, you're blaming God." These sentences became his mantra, a means of expressing, "This isn't my fault, but I still matter." He would use them to end letters to affluent hospital visitors, clinging to a dignity that no physical defect could diminish. Many people have a negative impression of Joseph's time in exhibits, but Tom Norman, the man responsible for his last public performance, was not as bad as it seems. Norman, in keeping with the ostentatious Victorian-era practices of his day, stood outside his London exhibition and shouted, "He's not here to frighten you, but to enlighten you." His belief was that an engaging narrative had greater impact than the physical display itself. In contrast to the earlier accounts that portrayed him as an avaricious inebriate, Norman said that he assisted Joseph in establishing his livelihood and achieving autonomy. They didn't work together for long. The cops eventually closed the show after just a few weeks. After Norman left the entertainment industry, he became an auctioneer. A few of his children even continued his career. He was the patriarch of a large family. His account of events presents a more nuanced and humane picture, and he consistently denied the accusation that he had harmed Joseph. A lot of people were saddened by Joseph's sleeping habits. His enormous head measured about 91 centimeters in diameter, which is more than double the average size of a human skull. Because of how hefty it was, laying down would cause it to slant backward, which would obstruct his airflow. Thus, he slept off while sitting up, his knees supporting his head as he curled up with his arms over his legs. He expressed his deepest desire to sleep, like everyone else, to his doctor, Frederick Trevis. That desire ultimately proved fatal for him. Joseph may have been thinking he could finally relax in April 1890 when he laid down in bed, but his head fell backward, dislocating his neck and killing him instantaneously. At the tender age of 27, he stood before us. According to what Trevis claimed afterwards, Joseph wished he could just feel normal, even if just for a night, and that is why he died. Another aspect of his tale, which was untrue, captivated audiences. His birth defects, according to Joseph's writings, originated when his mother was terrified of an elephant while carrying him. The narrative was consistent with the long-held theory that prenatal shocks might alter the look of the developing kid. Theoretically, the concept that an elephant was to blame for his illness was ideal for a theatrical production. Despite physicians proving it couldn't be done, it made way into plays and movies nevertheless. Actually, current scientific evidence led to a completely other direction. Joseph was misdiagnosed with neurofibromatosis, an illness that causes tumors to develop on nerves, for a long time by physicians. The name Elephant Man disease quickly spread, since it was a reasonable description at the time. Joseph did not exhibit the characteristic skin patches or nerve tumors of that ailment, which experts began to suspect in the 1980s. Rather, he had Proteus syndrome, an extremely unusual condition. Some skin, bones, and tissues can grow uncontrollably with this disorder, and it usually affects just a single area of the body. That would account for Joseph's peculiar growth pattern, particularly the noticeable asymmetry between his left and right halves. Joseph appeared to be a typical infant for the first 6 months of his life, before his congenital defects became apparent. The symptoms, which included a gradual swelling of his lips, roughening of his skin, and the appearance of pimples, then began to manifest. The changes were easiest to see when the child was 5 years old. According to his own words, his skin looked like an elephant's. This gradual change is consistent with what is now known about Proteus syndrome, which manifests itself in early childhood. The fact that Joseph's health was so unequal was really upsetting. His right side was far worse off than his left. While his left arm functioned nearly properly, his right arm was twisted, enlarged, and terminated in a massive hand with sausage-thick fingers. Even his lips and head had asymmetry, and his legs weren't immune either. The physician's efforts to diagnose him were greatly aided by this imbalance. These days, it fits the bill nicely with Proteus syndrome, a condition in which certain cells develop improperly. Science has made considerably more progress in recent years in unraveling the riddle. In 2011, scientists discovered that a mutation in the AKT1 gene which regulates cell proliferation, is the root cause of Proteus syndrome. Because of this, we can understand why Joseph's illness was so widespread and so terrible. Radiologists examined his preserved skeleton using X-rays and CT scans, and they discovered the characteristic bone overgrowth of Proteus' condition. Even more astoundingly, scientists are currently attempting to extract DNA from Joseph's bones. If they are successful, it may be the last piece of evidence that reveals what truly afflicted Joseph Merrick, even if it has been over a century. It seems like Joseph Merrick's ordeal could finally come to an end when he was rescued from a freak exhibition, becoming famous as the Elephant Man. However, the rescue wasn't as selfless as it seemed at first. Frederick Travis, the hero doctor who rescued Merrick in Bernard Pomerance's renowned play, transformed into a totally other type of ringmaster very soon after. He kept Merrick under the watchful eye of medical professionals rather than the public eye. To him, Merrick was more than simply a man. He was an object of study. In the same way that people used to admire and study carnival animals, Travis allowed scientific groups and physicians gawk and study him. This power dynamic is reversed in the play's most dramatic moment, as Travis is revealed as the specimen and Merrick as the doctor, revealing the setup for what it really was. It was exploitation with a prettier facade than simple benevolence. Prior to Travis, Merrick endured unforgiving circumstances at Tom Norman's hands. Norman put him on exhibit in a little shop opposite from the London hospital in 1884. It was a dilapidated establishment. Merrick slept concealed behind a curtain in the very room where curious onlookers would pay to gaze at him. Norman was a master at attracting an audience. He would stand outside and yell, "Get ready!" The most extraordinary human being who has ever lived is going to be seen by you. Subsequently, he would draw back the curtain, allowing the terror and attraction to overwhelm him. Even though it now serves sausages to the local community, the small business still stands, a silent reminder of the suffering that was previously peddled there. Merrick made a deliberate decision to live this life. He had terrible malformations when he was born in 1862, and they got worse as he got older. He ended up in the horrible Leicester Union Workhouse, a facility filled with elderly, neglected men, since no one would hire him when he was a teenager. The treatment was even bad than the food. The youngest inmate was Merrick, who was just 17 years old. There were no better choices, so he returned 2 days after his first attempt to flee. He had had enough by 1884. He requested to be displayed by contacting Tom Norman. With that one choice, he embarked on a journey of self-promotion, starting with modest performances in the East Midlands and finishing in London. Managers at his shows dubbed him the Elephant Man and tried to get him to appear in more and more shows. Still, compared to the loneliness and agony of the workhouse, Merrick preferred this life of scrutiny and hushed conversation. Years later, with the release of The Elephant Man, Merrick's story became renowned in a different way. People finally stopped viewing him as a freak show and started seeing him for who he really was, a guy with feelings, ideas, and dignity. The film's humanizing portrayal of Merrick, played by John Hurt, resonated deeply. The team's efforts to give him a lifelike appearance were so impressive that they even inspired the Academy Awards to establish a new category for Best Makeup. However, not everyone thought the film was perfect. Some spectators were concerned that it was harkening back to the freak exhibitions of yesteryear by graphically depicting Merrick's infirmities. Viewers were left contemplating not just Merrick, but also the societal perception of handicap after watching the video. Films such as My Left Foot and The Theory of Everything owe a great deal to The Elephant Man, and its legacy has influenced subsequent representations of individuals with physical disabilities. It shed light on uncommon situations, but also prompted discussions regarding the power dynamics surrounding the telling of such stories. The play catapulted Bernard Pomerantz to international stardom. He was the one who narrated Merrick's story. He started his career in London after moving there from Brooklyn, where he was born in 1940. Despite his involvement in the founding of the Foconovo theatrical group and his earlier, more experimental work, none of his plays achieved the level of impact that The Elephant Man did. It was a smashing success at its 1977 opening and went on to win a Tony Award in 1979. After that one play, Pomerantz's reputation was irrevocably linked to it. He persisted in penning plays, such as Melons, which had a Broadway production in 2014 with Bradley Cooper at the helm. Up until his death in 2017, he continued to write poems and work on new ideas. However, The Elephant Man's shadow remained a constant presence, regardless of his actions. On one hand, it was his crowning achievement. On the other, he was stuck on it.